The sound of a rattlesnake's warning cut through the stillness of the desert night, causing Nathaniel Lane to freeze mid-step as she carefully balanced the stack of books in her arms. The flickering light from the lantern hanging outside her modest cabin was barely enough to illuminate the path from her wagon, but it would have to do. Her heartbeat quickened as she held her breath, listening for the telltale rattle once more, hoping the venomous creature had slithered away into the darkness. Texas in 1877 was unforgiving to most, but especially to a woman alone. Nathaniel Natty to the few who'd earned the privilege had come to Terlingua after her father's passing 8 months prior, inheriting both his small cabin and his position as the town's only teacher. At 22, she had found herself suddenly responsible for educating the children of miners, farmers, and ranchers who populated this remote corner of Brewster County. The snake's warning faded, and Natty continued toward her cabin door, shifting the books to free one hand for the latch. Inside, she lit the oil lamp on her desk and arranged her precious volumes Shakespeare, Dickens, and a well-worn Bible alongside the readers and primers she used for teaching. The school term wouldn't begin for another week, but preparations consumed her days. As the lamp's glow filled the simple cabin, Natty removed the pins from her hair, allowing the chestnut waves to fall past her shoulders. Teaching was her calling, but her greatest joy came in these quiet evening hours when she could lose herself in literature. Tonight she would continue Great Expectations, a novel that reminded her of a world far beyond the harsh Texas borderlands. 20 miles away, Thomas Everett guided his horse through the scrub brush, his body aching from days in the saddle. At 30 years old, he had spent most of his life working cattle, first in East Texas and now in the unforgiving terrain near the Mexican border. The small herd he delivered to Fort Davis had fetched a fair price, enough to keep him going until the next drive. His weathered face, tanned by the relentless sun, betrayed nothing of his thoughts as he searched for a suitable place to make camp. Tom, as he was known to the few men he called friends, had learned early that survival in this land required strength, vigilance, and an ability to read the natural world. He could track game across rocky terrain, predict storms by watching cloud patterns, and speak enough Spanish to trade with the vaqueros and settlers from across the border. But there was one skill that had always eluded him, one that brought a flush of shame to his face whenever he encountered it. Thomas Everett could not read a single word. His inability to decipher letters had been carefully hidden for decades. As a boy, he'd been needed too much on his family's struggling farm for schooling. Later, as a young man working cattle drives, he developed an exceptional memory to compensate, committing everything to mind rather than paper. He could calculate figures in his head faster than most men could with pencil and paper, but the mysterious symbols in books and newspapers remained indecipherable. The night had grown cool when Tom finally made camp beside a small creek. After tending to his horse and building a modest fire, he unwrapped the package he'd received in Fort Davis. The Army quartermaster had handed it to him with the payment for the cattle, a letter from his sister in San Antonio. The folded paper sat heavy in his hands, its contents as inaccessible to him as if they were locked in a safe. Tomorrow, he would reach Terlingua. There, he hoped to find someone discreet who could read the letter to him before he continued west to the ranch where he'd been hired as foreman. With that thought, he tucked the letter inside his shirt close to his heart and leaned back against his saddle to rest beneath the vast canopy of stars. The following evening, Natty sat at her small table near the window, a candle burning beside her open book. The day had been spent organizing her classroom in the one-room schoolhouse at the edge of town, and now she savored this peaceful moment with her novel. Outside, the desert had cooled rapidly after sunset, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of creosote through the open window. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention from the pages. Visitors were rare at this hour, and Natty reached for the small revolver her father had insisted she learn to use. Terlingua was relatively peaceful compared to some frontier towns, but isolation made her cabin vulnerable. A man's silhouette appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. "Begging your pardon, madam," he called, remaining respectfully outside. "I saw your light and wondered if I might trouble you for some water, for my horse and myself." Natty kept the revolver hidden in the folds of her skirt as she moved to the doorway, lifting her lantern to better see the stranger. His face was shadowed by several days' growth of beard, but his eyes, when they caught the light, were a clear, honest blue. "Of course," she replied cautiously. "The well is just behind the cabin. You're welcome to draw water there." Tom nodded gratefully, noticing the book on her table. Something like longing crossed his features before he turned toward the well. Natty watched him go, noting the easy way he moved, confident but not threatening, and the care with which he treated his tired horse. When he returned to the doorway, hat still respectfully in hand, she had placed the revolver back in its drawer but remained watchful. "You're new to Terlingua," she observed, not a question but a statement. "Yes, madam, just passing through. I've taken a position at the Chizo's ranch to the west." He hesitated, then added, "I'm Thomas Everett, most call me Tom." "Nathaniel Lane," she replied. "Though most call me Miss Lane, as I'm the teacher here." She noticed how his gaze kept returning to her book, and for a moment she wondered if he was a fellow lover of literature, starved for reading material as many were in these remote parts. "Would you care for some coffee, Mr. Everett?" "It's still hot from supper." Tom appeared genuinely surprised by the offer. "That's mighty kind, but I wouldn't want to impose on a lady alone." Natty appreciated his consideration. "You can drink it on the porch if that makes us both more comfortable. It gets cold quickly once the sun sets." A few minutes later, Tom sat on her small porch, cradling a tin cup of strong coffee and watching as Natty returned to her book by the window. The light from her candle illuminated her profile, creating a portrait that reminded him of illustrations he'd seen in store windows, images of refinement and learning that belonged to a world he had never entered. "What are you reading, if you don't mind my asking?" His voice was quiet, almost reverent in the stillness. Natty looked up, surprised by the question. "Dickens' Great Expectations. Have you read it?" Tom's gaze dropped to his coffee. "No, madam, I can't say that I have." Something in his tone made Natty study him more carefully. The way he'd asked about the book, there was a hunger there, a curiosity that seemed deeper than casual interest. "It's the story of a boy named Pip," she offered, "who dreams of becoming a gentleman. It's about how our expectations shape us for better or worse." Tom nodded, his eyes meeting hers briefly before looking away. "Sounds like a fine story." A moment of silence passed between them before Tom finished his coffee and stood. "I should find a place to camp for the night. Thank you for your kindness, Miss Lane." "Mr. Everett," Natty called as he turned to leave. "There's a grove of cottonwoods about a quarter-mile west that offers good shelter. It's where travelers often camp." He tipped his hat in thanks, a small smile softening his weathered features. "Good night, then." As Tom led his horse toward the cottonwoods, the letter from his sister seemed to burn against his chest. He wondered if the schoolteacher might be willing to read it for him, but the thought of admitting his limitation to such an educated woman filled him with shame. Better to wait and find someone else, perhaps one of the ranch hands at his new position, someone less likely to judge him. The next morning, Natty was sweeping the schoolhouse porch when she spotted Thomas Everett in front of the general store, speaking with old Pete, the shopkeeper. Even from a distance, she could tell something was troubling the cowboy. His posture was tense, his movements agitated as he walked away from the store empty-handed. Curiosity and concern prompted her to intercept him as he headed toward the livery stable. "Good morning, Mr. Everett." "I trust you found the cottonwoods suitable?" Tom stopped, visibly composing himself before meeting her gaze. "Yes, madam, slept better than I have in days." Natty noticed how he kept the folded paper in his hand partly concealed, as if afraid she might see it. "Is everything all right?" "You seem troubled." For a moment, it appeared he might brush off her concern, but something in her expression must have convinced him otherwise. Tom looked around to ensure they weren't overheard, then spoke in a low voice. "I was hoping to find someone who could assist me with a matter before I continue to the ranch. Perhaps I could help," Natty offered. "Teaching isn't my only skill." Tom's knuckles whitened around the paper. Pride warred visibly with necessity on his face before he finally spoke. I received this letter from my sister in San Antonio. I need to know what it says, but understanding dawned on Natty, and with it, a wave of compassion. You can't read it, she finished softly. The shame in his eyes was answer enough. Natty had encountered adults who couldn't read before. It wasn't uncommon in frontier territories where education was often sacrificed for survival, but she'd never seen someone so deeply affected by the limitation. I'd be happy to read it for you, Mr. Everett. There's no judgment here. Relief and gratitude washed over his features. I'd be in your debt, Miss Lane. They walked together to a quiet spot beneath a mesquite tree at the edge of town. Tom handed her the letter, his calloused fingers brushing against hers in the exchange. Natty unfolded the paper carefully, noting the neat, feminine handwriting. Dear Thomas, she read aloud, keeping her voice low, I pray this finds you well. I write with difficult news. Father passed 3 weeks ago after a brief illness. The doctor said his heart simply gave out. He went peacefully in his sleep. Natty glanced up to see Tom's jaw tighten, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains. She continued reading about the funeral, the disposition of his father's meager possessions, and his sister's decision to remain in San Antonio with her husband's family. The letter concluded with hopes of seeing him soon and news that another baby was expected in the winter. When she finished, Tom remained silent for a long moment. Thank you, he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. I suspected something was wrong when her letter came so soon after the last one I received. I'm very sorry about your father, Natty said gently. Tom nodded, accepting the folded letter back. We weren't close in recent years, but still, he was my father. When did you last see him? 4 years ago, I went home for Christmas after my mother passed. He tucked the letter away, straightening his shoulders as if physically setting aside his grief. I should be on my way. The ranch is expecting me by tomorrow. Natty hesitated, then made a decision. Mr. Everett, I have a proposition for you. When he looked at her questioningly, she continued, I teach reading to children every day. I could teach you as well. Surprise, followed by defensive pride, crossed his features. I appreciate the offer, but I've managed this long without it. And yet today you needed a stranger to tell you your own father died, she pointed out gently. Wouldn't it be better to read your sister's next letter yourself? The truth of her words clearly struck him. He removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. Even if I wanted to learn, I'm headed to the Chizo's ranch. It's a fair distance. You could come on Sundays when there's no school, Natty suggested, if you're truly interested. Tom studied her face, seeming to search for any sign of mockery or condescension, but found only sincerity. Why would you do this for a stranger? Because reading brings me joy every day and everyone deserves that opportunity, she smiled. Besides, teaching is what I do. After a long moment, Tom nodded. All right, Miss Lane, I'll come next Sunday if the ranch can spare me. I'll expect you then. We can start with the basics. As Tom mounted his horse and rode west toward his new position, Natty watched him go with an unexpected sense of anticipation. There was something compelling about the proud cowboy with the honest blue eyes, a man skilled in ways she could never be, yet vulnerable in a way she understood intimately. The following Sunday dawned clear and cool. Natty had just finished her breakfast when she heard the approaching hoofbeats. Thomas Everett looked different today, freshly shaved, his dark hair neatly trimmed, wearing a clean shirt beneath his work jacket. The transformation highlighted his strong features and made him appear younger than she'd initially thought. Good morning, Miss Lane, he greeted her, removing his hat. I hope I'm not too early. Not at all, she assured him, genuinely pleased he'd kept the appointment. I've prepared some materials for us to work with. Inside the cabin, Natty had set up her small table with primers, a slate board, and several sheets of paper. She motioned for Tom to sit beside her, aware of his discomfort in these unfamiliar surroundings. Before we begin, she said, I want you to know that many people, intelligent, capable people, never had the opportunity to learn reading as children. There's no shame in it. Tom's hands, which had been fidgeting with his hat, grew still. My father thought schooling was a waste for a boy who'd spend his life working cattle. My mother taught me my numbers so I wouldn't be cheated in business, but she fell ill before we got to letters. Natty nodded, understanding dawning, and after that it became harder to admit you didn't know how. Exactly, he confirmed, meeting her gaze directly for the first time that morning. I've hidden it my whole adult life. Well, we're going to change that starting today. She opened the primer to the first page. We'll begin with the alphabet, the foundation of everything. For the next 2 hours, Natty introduced Tom to the 26 letters that had eluded him for 3 decades. She was impressed by his determination and quick memory as he began associating sounds with symbols. His hands, more accustomed to ropes and reins, moved awkwardly as he attempted to form letters on the slate, but he persisted without complaint. "You're doing remarkably well," she encouraged him as they concluded the first lesson. "If you practice what we've covered today, we can move forward next Sunday." Tom looked at the sheet of paper where he'd carefully copied the alphabet. "I'll practice every evening," he promised, folding the paper and tucking it inside his shirt pocket. "The ranch hands will be asleep and no one need know." As he prepared to leave, Tom paused on the porch. "Miss Lane, I've been wondering, why do you live out here alone?" "A lady with your education could surely find a position in a larger town." Natty leaned against the doorframe, considering her answer. "My father was the teacher here for 15 years. When he died, I could have left, but these people, these children, would have had no one." "Education is rare enough in these parts," she smiled slightly. "Besides, I find a certain peace in the desert that I never felt back east." Tom nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Peace can be hard to come by, indeed." She hesitated, then asked, "Will you tell me about the ranch sometime?" "I've never seen much beyond Terlingua." A genuine smile transformed his face. "It would be my pleasure, Miss Lane." As promised, Tom returned the following Sunday and the Sunday after that. Each week brought noticeable progress as he mastered letter combinations, simple words, and eventually short sentences. His determination never wavered, even when frustrated by the inconsistencies of English spelling. On his 4th visit, as autumn painted the desert with subtle hues of gold and amber, Tom arrived with a small cloth-wrapped package. "For you," he said, presenting it to Natty with an uncharacteristic shyness. "A token of my appreciation." Inside the cloth was a beautifully carved wooden bookmark, its edge decorated with intricate desert flowers. "I carved it myself," he explained, watching her expression. "Figured a lady who loves books as much as you do might have use for it." Natty traced the delicate design with her fingertip, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's beautiful, Tom, thank you." It was the first time she'd used his first name, and the small intimacy hung in the air between them. Their lesson that day focused on practical reading labels on food items, simple instructions, the kinds of text Tom might encounter daily. When he successfully read an entire paragraph from a seed catalog without assistance, the pride in his eyes made Natty's heart swell. As they took a break for coffee, Tom fulfilled his promise to tell her about the Chizo's ranch. He described the vast landscape, the challenging work of managing cattle in the desert terrain, and the camaraderie among the ranch hands. His words painted vivid pictures that transported Natty beyond her small world. "The mountains turn purple at sunset," he told her, his normally reserved manner giving way to enthusiasm. "And on clear nights, it feels like you could reach up and touch the stars." "It sounds magnificent," Natty said wistfully. "I've always wanted to see more of the territory, but it's not easy for a woman alone," Tom finished, "especially one with responsibilities." Their eyes met in mutual understanding, and something shifted between them, a recognition of shared loneliness, of dreams deferred for duty. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Sheriff Miller stood outside, hat in hand, apologetic but firm. "Miss Lane, sorry to disturb your Sunday, but there's trouble brewing. Peyton's boy fell from the loft and broke his arm something fierce. His ma's asking for you." Natty immediately began gathering her shawl and medical supplies. The unofficial duties of a frontier teacher often extended beyond education to include basic medical care, especially for children. "I'll come with you," Tom offered, already on his feet. The sheriff raised an eyebrow but made no comment as the three of them hurried toward the Peyton homestead on the outskirts of town. 8-year-old William's arm was indeed badly broken, the bone visibly displaced beneath the skin. His mother, a widow with 5 children, was barely maintaining her composure. Natty assessed the situation quickly. "It needs to be set before we can splint it," she told Mrs. Peyton, "and it will be painful." "I'll hold him steady," Tom volunteered, kneeling beside the sobbing child. "Hey there, partner," he said softly to the boy. "What's your name?" William, the child stammered through tears. "Well, William, I'm Tom. I broke my arm when I was about your age, falling off a horse. Hurt something awful, didn't it?" The boy nodded, momentarily distracted from his pain. "Miss Lane here is going to fix it, but I won't lie to you, it's going to hurt worse before it feels better. Think you can be brave for a few minutes?" William's fearful eyes darted between Tom and Natty. Will you stay?" "I'll be right here," Tom promised, positioning himself to hold the child securely. Natty worked quickly, her gentle hands belying their strength as she manipulated the broken bone back into alignment. William screamed once, then bit down on the leather strap Tom had placed between his teeth. Throughout the ordeal, Tom spoke quietly to the boy, his deep voice steady and reassuring. Once the arm was splinted and bandaged, and William had been given laudanum for the pain, Natty and Tom stepped outside into the gathering dusk. "You were wonderful with him," Natty said, washing her hands in the basin provided by Mrs. Peyton. "Have you children of your own?" Tom shook his head. "No, never married." He helped her gather her supplies. "You're quite skilled at doctoring, necessity," she explained. "We're 2 days' ride from the nearest physician. My father taught me what he knew, and I've learned the rest through experience and books." They walked back toward town in companionable silence, the desert night closing around them. When they reached her cabin, Tom hesitated before saying goodnight. "I may not make it next Sunday," he said regretfully. "We're moving the herd to winter pasture and I'll be needed." Disappointment flared unexpectedly in Natty's chest. "Of course, your work must come first." "But I'll continue practicing," he assured her, patting the book of simple stories she'd given him to study. "And I'll return as soon as I can." As she watched him ride away into the darkness, Natty realized how much she had come to look forward to their Sundays together. Thomas Everett had become more than a student, he had become a friend, perhaps the only true friend she had in Terlingua. 3 weeks passed without word from Tom. November brought cooler temperatures and occasional rain to the desert, turning the landscape surprisingly green. Natty threw herself into her teaching, but each Sunday she found herself glancing toward the road, hoping to see a familiar rider approaching. On the 4th Sunday, as Natty was returning from church, she spotted a horse tied outside her cabin. Her heart quickened as she recognized Tom's bay gelding, but her joy quickly turned to concern when she found Tom himself slumped on her porch, his right arm wrapped in a blood-soaked bandage. "Tom, what happened?" She rushed to his side, noting the pallor of his face and the tension around his eyes that spoke of significant pain. "Rustlers," he managed through gritted teeth. "Caught them with some of our calves. There was a fight." He attempted a smile that came out as a grimace. "Don't worry, they look worse." Natty helped him inside and eased him onto a chair. "Let me see the wound." Carefully unwrapping the makeshift bandage, she revealed a deep gash running from his elbow halfway to his wrist. "This needs stitching," she said, already gathering her medical supplies. "When did this happen?" "Yesterday morning. I rode straight here after we dealt with the rustlers." He watched as she efficiently prepared needles, thread, and antiseptic. "I trust you more than the barber in Alpine who fancies himself a surgeon. You rode all night with this." Natty shook her head, both exasperated and touched by his confidence in her. "It's a wonder you didn't bleed to death." "I'm tougher than I look," he said, though his pale face suggested otherwise. Natty worked methodically, cleaning the wound thoroughly before beginning the painful process of stitching it closed. Tom remained stoically silent, his only reaction an occasional sharp intake of breath when the needle pierced particularly tender flesh. "You should rest here tonight," Natty insisted when she finished bandaging his arm. "You're in no condition to ride back to the ranch." Too exhausted to argue, Tom allowed her to help him to the small cot she set up in the corner of her cabin. Within minutes, he was asleep, his features softened in repose. Natty sat beside the cot for a long while, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. Seeing this strong, capable man rendered vulnerable stirred something protective within her, an emotion she wasn't entirely prepared to examine. When Tom awoke hours later, the cabin was dark except for the soft glow of a candle beside him. Natty sat nearby, reading quietly. "You stayed with me," he observed, his voice rough with sleep. She looked up, closing her book. "How are you feeling?" "Like I tangled with a mountain lion, but I'll live." He shifted carefully to a sitting position. "Thank you, Natty." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it hung in the air between them. "You're welcome, Tom." In the candlelight, they regarded each other with new awareness, no longer merely teacher and student, but a man and a woman bound by something deeper than circumstances. "I brought you something," Tom said, breaking the charged silence. "In my saddlebag." Curious, Natty retrieved his saddlebag and brought it to him. From it, he withdrew a small book, its leather cover worn but well cared for. "It was my mother's," he explained as Natty opened it to reveal a collection of poetry. "I thought, maybe we could read it together." Natty's throat tightened with emotion at the significance of the gesture. "I'd like that very much." That night, as Tom rested on her cot and Natty sat beside him, they took turns with the book, Natty reading poems aloud, then Tom carefully sounding out simpler verses. The intimacy of shared words in the quiet cabin created a bond between them that transcended their differences in background and education. By morning, Tom's fever had broken, and though still weak, he insisted he needed to return to the ranch. "They'll be worried, and we've still got rustlers to deal with." Natty repacked his wound with fresh bandages and prepared provisions for his journey. "Promise you'll be careful," she said as she walked him to his horse. "That arm needs time to heal properly." Tom mounted carefully, looking down at her with an expression that made her heart race. "I promise, and I'll be back next Sunday if you'll still have me. I'll be waiting," she replied softly. True to his word, Tom returned the following Sunday, his arm healing well beneath Natty's careful stitches. Their reading lesson that day felt different, more like a shared pleasure than instruction. Tom's progress had been remarkable. He could now read simple texts independently, though he still struggled with complex words and spelling. As winter settled over the desert, their Sunday meetings became the highlight of each week for both of them. Tom would arrive mid-morning, often bringing small gifts, a jar of honey from the ranch's hives, wildflowers that somehow survived his ride, once even a young jackrabbit with an injured leg that they nursed back to health together. Their lessons gradually evolved into conversations that stretched late into the afternoon. Tom shared stories of his life as a cowboy, tales of cattle drives, and the characters he'd encountered throughout the territory. Natty spoke of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her dream of someday writing stories of her own, and the challenges of teaching in a frontier community where education was often considered a luxury. One Sunday in early December, Tom arrived with an unexpected proposal. "The ranch is hosting a Christmas gathering," he said as they sat by Natty's small fire after their lesson. "Nothing fancy, just a meal, some music, maybe some dancing. I wondered if you might consider accompanying me." The invitation caught Natty by surprise. Such an outing would represent a public acknowledgement of whatever was growing between them, no longer just a teacher helping a student, but a man courting a woman. "I'd be honored," she said after a moment's consideration, "though I should warn you, it's been years since I've danced." Tom's smile warmed his entire face. "That makes two of us, then." The day of the Christmas gathering arrived with unseasonable warmth, a reminder of the desert's unpredictable nature. Tom came for Natty in the ranch's wagon, dressed in his best clothing, a clean black coat over a white shirt, dark trousers, and boots polished to a shine. The transformation from weathered cowboy to gentleman suitor was striking. Natty had spent hours preparing, wearing her best dress, a deep green that complemented her chestnut hair, which she'd arranged in an elegant updo adorned with a simple silver pin that had belonged to her mother. Tom's appreciative gaze as she emerged from her cabin told her the effort had been worthwhile. "You look beautiful," he said simply, helping her into the wagon with careful hands. The ranch house was larger than Natty had imagined, its adobe walls sturdy against the elements. Inside, oil lamps and candles created a warm glow as ranch hands and neighboring settlers gathered to celebrate the season. A fiddle player and a man with a guitar provided lively music in one corner, while tables laden with food lined another wall. Tom kept Natty close as he introduced her to his colleagues and the ranch owner, a gruff but fair man named Harrison, who had taken a chance on hiring Tom as foreman despite his inability to read. "Best decision I ever made," Harrison told Natty. "Your cowboy here has a way with cattle and men that can't be taught from books. Your cowboy." The casual phrase lingered in Natty's mind as Tom led her to the improvised dance floor where several couples were already moving to a cheerful reel. His hand at her waist was steady as he guided her through the steps, his earlier claim of being out of practice belied by his natural grace. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Everett," she teased as they circled each other. "Where did a cattle foreman learn to dance so well?" His eyes crinkled with amusement. "My mother insisted, said a man should know how to behave in civilized company regardless of his station." As the evening progressed, Natty found herself drawn deeper into Tom's world. The ranch hands treated her with genuine respect, clearly influenced by their foreman's obvious admiration. The women wives of neighboring ranchers and a few female ranch employees welcomed her warmly, eager for news from town and appreciative of her work educating the community's children. Later, as they stood outside catching the cool evening breeze, Tom took Natty's hand in his. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said softly. "Having you here, it means a great deal to me." Natty squeezed his fingers gently. "I've enjoyed every moment." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. Then Tom turned to face her, his expression serious. "Natty, I need to tell you something." He took a deep breath. "When I first came to your door that night, I was just a man who couldn't read, ashamed of his ignorance. I never expected to find someone who would change my life the way you have." Her heart quickened at his words and the emotion behind them. "You've changed mine as well, Tom." "I'm still learning," he continued, "still making my way through your books word by word, but I know enough now to read the truth in your eyes when you look at me." His voice lowered. "And I hope you can read the same in mine." In answer, Natty rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief but filled with promise, a declaration without words that both understood perfectly. The ride back to Terlingua was quiet, both of them wrapped in the warmth of newfound intimacy despite the chill desert night. At her cabin door, Tom kissed her once more, lingering this time, his hands cradling her face with reverence. "Good night, Nathaniel Lane," he whispered. "Good night, Thomas Everett," she replied, reluctant to end the perfect evening. As winter gave way to spring, Tom's Sunday visits became more frequent. Sometimes he would arrive on Saturday afternoon and stay until Monday morning, sleeping on a bedroll on Natty's porch to maintain propriety while still maximizing their time together. The townsfolk noted the developing relationship with knowing smiles, but respectful distance. Frontier communities understood the value of human connection in a harsh land. By March, Tom could read at a basic level independently, sounding out newspaper articles and simple books with growing confidence. His writing remained more challenging, his calloused hands struggling with the fine motor control required, but he persisted with characteristic determination. One evening, as they sat side by side on Natty's porch watching the sunset paint the desert in fiery hues, Tom handed her a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" she asked, curious about his uncharacteristic nervousness. "Something I've been working on," he said, a flush visible even in the fading light. "It's for you." Natty unfolded the paper to find a letter written in Tom's distinctive, carefully formed handwriting. "Dear Natty, these words come slow to my pen but quick from my heart. Before I met you, I was half a man, hiding my shame behind pride. You gave me letters and words, but more than that, you gave me yourself. Your kindness, your patience, your smile that outshines the desert sun. I never thought to find love in this harsh country, but I found you. If you would do me the great honor of becoming my wife, I promise to spend the rest of my days making you as happy as you have made me. With all my heart." Thomas' tears blurred Natty's vision as she read the painstakingly written proposal. Each carefully formed letter represented hours of practice, each sentence a testament to his perseverance. "Tom," she breathed, unable to say more. "Is that a yes?" he asked, his voice unsteady. In answer, she threw her arms around his neck, the letter clutched tightly in her hand. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. 1,000 times yes. They were married in April, when wildflowers briefly transformed the desert into a riot of color. The ceremony took place outside the schoolhouse where Natty taught, attended by her students, the ranch hands, and nearly everyone from Terlingua and the surrounding homesteads. Sheriff Miller officiated, his usually stern face softened by the occasion. Natty wore a simple white dress with blue ribbons, carrying a bouquet of desert blooms gathered by her students. Tom, resplendent in a new suit purchased for the occasion, stood tall beside Reverend Phillips, his face alight with joy as he watched his bride approach. When the time came to sign the marriage certificate, Tom did so without hesitation, his signature clear and confident, a public declaration of both his new literacy and his commitment to Natty. The significance of the moment was not lost on those who knew his story, and a ripple of approving murmurs passed through the crowd. After the celebration, Tom drove Natty to the small house he had been preparing for months, closer to the Chizo's ranch than her cabin had been, but still within riding distance of the school. Inside, she found a home that perfectly blended their two worlds. Bookshelves built by Tom's own hands lined one wall, while practical frontier furnishings filled the rest of the space. Most touching was the study he had created for her, a sunny corner with a writing desk positioned to catch the morning light. "I know how much your teaching means to you," he said as he showed her the room. "I want you to have a place for your books and your writing." Natty's heart swelled with love for this man who understood her so completely. "It's perfect, Tom. Everything is perfect." That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other in new ways, tender, passionate, and profound. In the soft glow of candlelight, they expressed with touch what words could never fully convey, sealing their union in the most ancient language of all. Life as a married couple required adjustments for both of them. Tom continued his work as foreman at the Chizo's ranch, while Natty maintained her teaching position at the Terlingua school. Their schedules often meant days apart, but they treasured their evenings and weekends together, establishing routines that sustained them through the separations. Every night, regardless of how exhausted he might be from ranch work, Tom read aloud from whatever book they were sharing. Sometimes Natty would correct his pronunciation or help with an unfamiliar word, but increasingly he managed on his own. His favorites were adventure tales and histories of the West, though he developed an unexpected appreciation for poetry as well. In turn, Natty learned from Tom about the land, how to read weather patterns in cloud formations, how to identify edible plants in the desert, how to handle herself on horseback across difficult terrain. Under his patient instruction, she became more confident outdoors, embracing the wild beauty that had drawn him to this life. Their first significant test as a couple came that summer, when a prolonged drought threatened the ranch's cattle. Tom spent weeks moving the herd between increasingly scarce water sources, sometimes returning home only long enough to sleep for a few hours before heading out again. Natty supported him however she could, preparing food he could take with him, mending his work clothes, and most importantly, maintaining their home as a haven of peace amidst the crisis. When Tom finally returned after the drought broke, exhausted but triumphant, having lost minimal cattle, the gratitude in his eyes told her everything she needed to know about the strength of their partnership. As autumn approached again, marking nearly a year since Tom had first appeared on Natty's doorstep, they received news that would change their lives once more. Tom's sister would be visiting from San Antonio with her husband and children, eager to meet the woman who had captured her brother's heart. Illiter's letter says they'll arrive next week, Tom told Natty one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. His voice held a note of pride as he read his sister's words directly from the page, no intermediary needed. She's bringing both children and says her husband has business in Alpine afterward. Natty squeezed his hand. I'm looking forward to meeting them. Tom folded the letter carefully. There's something I haven't told you about Illiter, he said, a hint of old shame creeping into his voice. She doesn't know I couldn't read. I always made excuses for why I never wrote to her myself, had others write letters I dictated. Understanding immediately, Natty nodded. And now you don't want her to know you've only recently learned. Is that prideful of me? He asked, genuinely concerned. No, Natty assured him. Some things belong just to us. I won't say anything. When Illiter arrived with her family, Natty was struck by the physical resemblance between the siblings, the same clear blue eyes, the same quiet dignity. The reunion between brother and sister was touching, their grief over their father's passing tempered by the joy of being together again. Throughout the visit, Tom navigated his new literacy with subtle confidence, reading bedtime stories to his niece and nephew, sharing newspaper articles with his brother-in-law, and even helping Illiter with her travel journal. If she noticed anything unusual about her brother's relationship with the written word, she made no mention of it. On their final evening together, as the children slept and the adults enjoyed coffee on the porch, Illiter took Natty's hand. I want to thank you, she said softly. For what? Natty asked, for whatever you've done to bring my brother back to himself. Illiter's eyes shimmered with emotion in the lamplight. He was always so distant in his letters before, so formal. Now there's a lightness to him I haven't seen since we were children. Natty glanced at Tom, who was deep in conversation with Illiter's husband about cattle breeding. We've taught each other many things, she said simply. Later that night, after their guests had retired to their rooms, Tom held Natty close in their bed. I have something to tell you, he whispered against her hair. What is it? She asked, noting the mixture of nervousness and excitement in his voice. Harrison has offered me a partnership in the ranch, he said. A small share, but it would mean more stability, more security for our future. Natty raised herself on one elbow to look into his face. Tom, that's wonderful. There's more, he continued, his hand coming to rest gently on her abdomen. I've noticed the changes in you these past few weeks. The way you've been tired in the mornings, how certain foods no longer appeal to you. Natty's breath caught. She had suspected, but hadn't been certain enough to speak it aloud. Are we expecting a child, Natty? Tom asked, his voice tender with hope. Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. I think so. I wanted to be sure before I told you. The joy that transformed Tom's face was breathtaking. He gathered her into his arms, his kisses interspersed with whispered endearments and promises for their future together. The months that followed were filled with preparations both for Tom's new role at the ranch and for the child who would join their family in the spring. Natty continued teaching through the winter, her growing condition a source of excitement for her students, many of whom had never had a pregnant teacher before. Tom immersed himself in learning the business aspects of ranching, his literacy now a vital tool rather than a source of shame. In the evenings, he would read aloud to Natty and their unborn child, sometimes from practical books about animal husbandry or ranch management. Other times from the adventure tales and poetry they both enjoyed. As Natty's time drew near, Tom insisted on hiring help for their home, a local woman named Maria who had assisted with many births in the area. I want you to rest, he told Natty firmly when she protested the expense. You've been on your feet teaching all day. Let Maria handle the cooking and cleaning. His concern touched her deeply, especially as the discomforts of late pregnancy made her usual activities more challenging. By March, Natty had reluctantly stepped away from teaching temporarily, with one of her older students taking over under her supervision. Their son was born on a clear April morning, almost exactly a year after their wedding. The labor was long but uncomplicated, with Tom remaining by Natty's side throughout, his calm presence anchoring her through the pain. James Thomas Everett, they named him, honoring both Natty's father and his own. The infant had Tom's dark hair and Natty's determined chin, a perfect blend of his parents that filled them both with wonder. "I never thought I could love anyone the way I love you," Tom whispered to Natty as she nursed their newborn son. "But now my heart has somehow grown to include him too." Natty understood exactly what he meant. The love she felt for her husband and child transcended anything she had experienced before, deeper than passion, stronger than friendship, more sustaining than literature had ever been. By summer, they had established new rhythms as a family. Natty returned to teaching part-time, bringing young James with her to the schoolhouse where a cradle stood beside her desk. Tom adjusted his ranch duties to ensure he was home more regularly, often taking their son with him for short rides in a special carrier he had designed. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, now a threesome with James asleep in Natty's arms, Tom reflected on the journey that had brought them together. "You remember that first night when I saw you reading by candlelight?" he asked, his voice soft with memory. Natty smiled. "You looked so lost standing there with your hat in your hands." "I was lost," he admitted. "Had been for years without knowing it." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining naturally. "Who would have thought that not being able to read would lead me to everything I never knew I wanted? And who would have thought that teaching letters would teach me about love?" Natty countered, leaning her head against his shoulder. As darkness settled over the desert, they remained on the porch, their son sleeping peacefully between them. Above them, the stars emerged one by one, a celestial alphabet spelling out possibilities as endless as the Texas sky. 5 years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. The Chizo's ranch prospered under Harrison's leadership and Tom's increasingly significant contribution. Their partnership expanded, giving the Everett family greater security and allowing them to make improvements to their home and land. James grew into a lively, curious boy with his father's love of the outdoors and his mother's affinity for stories. At 5, he was already reading simple books independently, a fact that filled Tom with quiet pride and occasional amazement. "He makes it look so easy," Tom remarked one evening as they watched James sound out words from a picture book. "He has advantages you didn't," Natty reminded him gently. "Including a father who reads to him every night." Their family had expanded again 2 years earlier with the arrival of their daughter, Catherine Illiterate, a determined little girl with Natty's chestnut hair and her father's blue eyes. At 3, she was already showing signs of inheriting both parents' stubborn independence. The school in Terlingua had grown along with the community. Natty now shared teaching responsibilities with another instructor, allowing her more time with her family while still pursuing the vocation she loved. She had also begun writing stories of her own frontier tales that captured the spirit and challenges of life in the Texas borderlands. "You should try to get these published," Tom encouraged after reading her latest work, the story of a young widow who establishes herself as a successful rancher despite overwhelming odds. "People back east would appreciate knowing what life is really like out here." Natty was considering this possibility when an unexpected opportunity arose. A publisher from San Antonio, visiting relatives in Alpine, heard about the schoolteacher who wrote authentic Western stories and arranged to meet her. Impressed with Natty's work, he offered to publish a collection of her tales, a prospect that both excited and terrified her. "What do you think?" she asked Tom that night, showing him the publisher's letter. "Is it presumptuous to think anyone would want to read stories written by a frontier schoolteacher?" Tom considered her question seriously, as he did all matters involving his wife's aspirations. "I think your stories deserve to be read," he said finally. They show the West as it truly is, not just the danger and hardship, but the beauty and humanity as well. His eyes met hers with absolute conviction. "If you want to do this, Natty, I support you completely." With Tom's encouragement, Natty agreed to the publication. The process took months of correspondence and revisions, but by Christmas of that year, she held in her hands a bound copy of Tales from the Borderlands by Nathaniel Lane Everett. The book's dedication reads simply, "For Tom, who taught me that the greatest stories are lived, not merely read." The success of Natty's book, modest but meaningful, brought an unexpected consequence: letters from readers, many of them women living in isolated circumstances similar to her own. These correspondents found in her stories a reflection of their experiences that mainstream literature rarely acknowledged. "Listen to this one," Natty said to Tom one evening, reading from a particularly moving letter. "Your story about the teacher who falls in love with the rancher made me weep, not because it was sad, but because it was the first time I've seen my own life, our challenges and joys, represented with such honesty and hope." Tom smiled, recognizing elements of their own story in the fictional tale she referenced. "You've given them a voice," he said, "just as you gave me the words to express what was in my heart." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside the arrival of riders at an unusual hour. Tom went to investigate, returning moments later with news. "It's Harrison," he said, his expression grave. "He's had an accident, thrown from his horse into a ravine. They're bringing him here because we're closer than Alpine." The next hours were chaotic as the injured ranch owner was settled in their spare bedroom. The doctor, summoned from Alpine, arrived near dawn and confirmed what they feared: Harrison's injuries were severe, including internal bleeding that couldn't be stopped. In his final hours, Harrison asked to speak privately with Tom. When Tom emerged from the sick room, his face was solemn but composed. "He's named me as his successor," he told Natty quietly, with instructions to buy out his sister's share of the ranch over time. The responsibility was enormous. The Chizos was one of the largest operations in the region, but Natty knew immediately that Tom would accept it. This land, these animals, the men who worked alongside him, they were as much a part of him as the blood in his veins. Harrison passed peacefully that evening, with Tom and Natty at his bedside. The funeral 2 days later drew people from throughout the territory, a testament to the respect the older man had earned during his years in the harsh frontier environment. As they stood together after the service, James and Catherine solemnly holding their hands, Natty felt the weight of the moment, the ending of one chapter and the beginning of another. "Are you ready for this?" she asked Tom softly. His eyes, clear and steady as always, met hers. "With you beside me, I'm ready for anything." The transition to full ownership of the ranch occurred gradually over the next year, as Tom fulfilled Harrison's wish to buy out his sister's interest in the property. The responsibility transformed their lives in many ways. They moved from their small house to the main ranch house. Tom's working hours grew longer, and Natty found herself taking on new duties as the wife of the ranch owner. Through it all, they maintained the foundations of their relationship. Reading together remained a nightly ritual, even if it sometimes happened in the early hours of the morning after Tom returned from checking on calving cattle. Their children thrived in the ranch environment, learning both practical skills from their father and academic knowledge from their mother. Natty continued writing, publishing a second collection of stories that gained even more recognition than the first. She also maintained her connection to the school, serving on its board and occasionally teaching special lessons. 10 years after that first night when Tom had found Natty reading by candlelight, they hosted a celebration at the ranch, part anniversary observance, part community gathering. As friends and neighbors filled their home with laughter and conversation, Natty found a moment of quiet reflection on the porch, watching the familiar desert sunset. Tom joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Everett." Natty leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I was thinking about how much has changed since you appeared on my doorstep asking for water." "And how much hasn't changed?" Tom added, his voice warm with affection. You're still the woman who lights up a room with her mind. I'm still the man trying to be worthy of her. You've always been worthy, Natty assured him, turning to face him fully. From the very beginning. Inside, their daughter's laughter rose above the general conversation, followed by their son's deeper voice as he told some tale to an appreciative audience. Outside, the vast Texas landscape stretched to the horizon, wild and beautiful and filled with possibility. You ever regret it? Tom asked suddenly. Staying here instead of going somewhere with more refinement, you could have been a famous author in Boston or New York. Natty considered the question seriously, as she always did when Tom revealed these rare glimpses of insecurity. Not for a single moment, she answered truthfully. What would fame be compared to this life we've built, our children, our home, the work we do together? She took his hands, still calloused from ranch work despite his owner status, just as hers bore the marks of teaching and writing. Besides, you forget something important. What's that? He asked, genuinely curious. I found the greatest story of all right here, she said simply. Ours. As darkness settled over the desert, they returned to their guests, moving together through the rooms filled with people whose lives had intertwined with theirs over the years. The schoolchildren, some now adults themselves, who had learned to read under Natty's guidance. The ranch hands who had worked alongside Tom through drought and plenty. Neighbors who had stood with them in times of hardship and celebration. Later that night, as the house quieted and their children slept, Tom and Natty sat beside the fireplace, a book open between them. It was one of the first novels they had read together years ago, its pages now worn from repeated handling. Read to me, Natty requested, settling against his shoulder. Tom began, his voice confident as he brought the familiar words to life. The man who once couldn't recognize a single letter now read with expression and understanding, the text as accessible to him as the stars in the night sky. Listening to him, Natty felt a profound contentment wash over her. In teaching this proud cowboy to read, she had found her own greatest lesson that love, like literacy, opens worlds previously unimagined. That partnership, built on mutual respect and complementary strengths, creates something more powerful than either person could achieve alone. Outside their window, the Texas night stretched vast and starlit, a fitting backdrop for the continuing story they were writing together word by word, day by day in the beautiful language of a shared life.